Hi, I'm going to demonstrate the installation of Truckweight's onboard scale system for air and mechanical suspension. The air suspension is very simple. It's a single air sensor that tees into inner line going in and out of the airbags. This one's labeled here for the drives. You'll notice here this is labeled trailer for mechanical trailer. So the example I'm using here is this air ride tractor and spring ride trailer. You have your display here. It's a touchscreen display, lithium ion battery. It'll show you your front axle, drive axle, trailer weight, total weight, net weight, and it has a recharger. This could be plugged into a lighter or it could be hardwired from the panel, and that charges the handheld. This is your complete sensor here, your complete air sensor. It's uniquely calibrated from -40 to +160 degrees Fahrenheit. So it keeps its accuracy throughout full temperature ranges. We have patent on that process. It's a very accurate sensor, and it's a one-time calibration. So you don't have to recalibrate and recalibrate unless you change something in your suspension system, like your leveling valve. Mechanical sensor measures strain in the vehicle's suspension system. That little piece there is your strain gauge. It's about a 1/4 inch square, and that gets bonded onto a metal surface. This here surface here is going to duplicate, say, a front axle of a truck or a round walking beam, round axle or walking beam or chamber suspension. The strain gauges work on all those suspension types. In a kit for mechanical installation, you're going to have a Loctite 5510 for covering it after it's bonded down. You're going to have Loctite 430. And for installation, you're also going to need some isopropyl alcohol or acetone and a piece of sandpaper. So what we do is we initially clear the rust and everything off the axle if there is any. You do a light grinding on it, getting rid of any pitting or heavy rust. I intentionally got a heavy rusted beam here and cleaned up an area where there's rust pitting and so on with the grinder. Once that's done, you're going to use some sandpaper. This is 220 grit, just to give it a finishing sand here before you grind it down. And then you're going to completely clean it with some isopropyl alcohol, using Bounty as a paper towel to clean it. And the paper towel should be white when you're done cleaning that surface before you bond it down. I'm going to do a close-up of the bonding and putting the glue of the strain gauge process. I just want to complete the installation of the kit. So what is included in the kit is the Loctite 5510, the Loctite 430, the strain gauges, and in this case, we're going on a rear trailer. So one would go on one rear axle on a tandem suspension on top of each axle, and then these wires join together. There's these 3 green, red, white, green, and black, and to the transmitter wire. So these 3 will all join together. 3 red, 3 white, 3 black, 3 green. And you heat shrink those together, seal them up nice and tight, and that's how it's done. But before you bond them all together, you're going to bond the strain gauges down, and then after it's bonded down and before you put the black stuff on, you're going to just put one strain gauge attached to the cable at a time. So just hand twist the wires together. Just hand twist them like that. Make sure they're not touching, and then put some strain on the axle. Now let me observe on the handheld here. When you touch PSI, you can actually see the readings. So when it's straining, you'll be able to see the reading and be able to, that's reading air, 65 PSI, and then a strain reading. As you strain that, you'll see that number move up and down. And that's what we're testing for when you're actually installing the strain gauges. So there's an installation video on our website on how to operate the handheld, and that's what you should watch before you do the install, so you understand the ins and outs of how this works. We're also available anytime for support, and we encourage you to contact us if you have any questions or need any support during the installation process. You can also order the kit with a mount. The kit will come, the display will come with a mount on it. You can still get out of the truck with it, but it'll have this mount that you can mount in the dash of the cab if you want it, and some people permanently mount it there. Now I'm going to demonstrate how to bond this strain gauge down in a more close-up shot. This could be the front axle, for example. When we install on the front axle, we put it in the middle from driver's side to passenger side here. And we put it usually on a front axle. You got that weld seam that runs down the center, so you can put on either side of that weld seam. But on a walking beam suspension, it would go like halfway down, say the rear axle on the both sides, and make them symmetrical. You put it in the middle of the walking beam. Same spot on driver's side and passenger side. Just mark it with a piece of chalk, measure it on both sides here, and put it right in the middle, both positions, driver's side, passenger side. If it's a tandem trailer axle with 5-inch round axles, we put it right in the middle of those axles, the round axles. So if this is your round axle, we put it right on top in the center, one on one axle, one on the other. And so we'll be installing strain gauges like this. One would be on the driver's side on the walking beam, one would be on the passenger side symmetrically. On the front axle configuration, we just put one in the center of the axle. On the trailer axle, tandem trailer axle, you'd put one in the rear, one in the front on top of the axle. And these wires would join together to the transmitter wire that's here, okay? It would get one output from a trailer or a walking beam suspension or Chalmers. And if it was a front axle setup, this strain gauge would be attached to the transmitter, just a single strain gauge on top of the axle. So now I'm gonna install a strain gauge so you can see how that process is. So in this case, I've already did the grinding, cleaned things up. So I'm gonna take the fine sandpaper here. I got a 220 grit, but it could be 180, 200. I'm just gonna find an area here on both axles. I'm just gonna sand it up here. And that's pretty smooth right there. Then you clean the axle till it's almost like white. You use a Bounty paper towel, some isopropyl alcohol. So you use a piece of Bounty paper towel. And I usually tear it into 2 or 3 pieces, fold it, put the isopropyl on there. You clean up the general area where you're going to put you notice how I cleaned somewhere the cable's going to run down here, an area, because that Loctite is an adhesive and it bonds really well to metal. It keeps the rust out. And I cleaned a larger area here that I can cover, just a thin layer. After you're done with that black Loctite 5510, you can see how dirty that is. So I'm just going to general clean up the whole area, just so the Loctite bonds really well after the job is done. But the main area you really have to clean up. And you go in for a second and third cleaning right where the strain gauge bonds down, where we sanded here. So right in that area, strain gauge is going to bond. Just make sure that it's super clean. You see that's dirty. I'll clean it again. Dirty. Clean it again. That's dirty. Put some more on there. Your paper should be white. That's how clean it should be. There again. We're getting there. Now that's clean. That's a really clean area there right now. That's awesome. So now, this stuff dries really quick. So, and that's fine. If you're in an area where it's really windy and there's dust blowing around, do not do it. You need to be in an area where dust and stuff is not going to go down on that surface. It needs to be completely clean. So the strain gauge has a plastic cover on it like that. And you'll see the soldering joints. When you bond the strain gauge down, these soldering joints are up. So this is the square piece you glue down. Now this is very sensitive. You can see through that little square strain gauge there and these tiny little hair wires. Now you don't have to worry about the hair wires touching the metal, they're coated. So when you're bonding it down, it's okay if glue and this is touching the metal. What's important is when we bond this down, we get it square on the spot where we want it, where we got it marked. So it's going to be on the same side symmetrically on the driver's side and passenger side on a walking beam or center of the top axle in the case of trailer axles, or the center of a front suspension axle, for example. So it's going to go down here, and what we're going to do is remove this plastic cover, and you'll see we use the plastic cover to spread the glue around. So the back of this strain gauge has a little piece of 3M tape on it, and so we'll be using that to secure the strain gauge. Another good idea too when you're bonding this down is use a piece of zip tie just to hold the cable in a general position here. You don't have to make it tight, but just so it doesn't fall off while you're trying to bond this down. It's good practice. So now I'm going to remove this tape and not to damage the strain gauge in the process. This cover just comes off, and there's the strain gauge. Now avoid touching the bottom with your fingers. It doesn't matter if you touch the top, but you don't want any oil or anything getting on the bottom of that strain gauge before you bond it down. So just remove the 3M tape that's in the back, and sometimes that's easier said than done. We'll just pull it off. There we go. Now, once this is off, what I like to do is just move these up on like a 45-degree angle like that before I bond it down. And I kind of line up where it's going to go down center. And I just push this 3M tape down, just like that. I'm not using a zip tie here to hold it on the axle, but in the real world, I would put a zip tie here and on a truck and hold that in position. So that's there right now. Now what I'm going to do is bond this strain gauge down. So before you do that, you need a piece of plastic or a piece of wax paper, and you're going to hold it down like so, and hold that for 4 minutes after you put the glue down. And when you put it down initially, just lift your thumb and look at the orientation of the strain gauge. If you see that it's twisted, you can rotate it left or right a little bit, just to get it lined up the way you want it while it's wet. Make sure it's square, and then hold your thumb on it and don't move. Hold it firm for 4 minutes, and I'll demonstrate how that's going to be done here in just a second. So once that's there, before you bond it down, there's no glue there right now. So I'm just going to carefully lift that up a little bit so I can get the glue underneath. And you take your Loctite 430 and you just put 1 drop. Don't put too much, because if you put too much, it'll take too long to dry and it won't set properly. So underneath the strain gauge, you put 1 drop. There we go. Then you take the cover, and just make sure it's clean. And you take the cover and you smear that around the nice circular area, covering this whole area, and swipe it away. So it's just a thin layer, so it bonds quickly. Then you hold your thumb down. Like I said, have a quick look. That's nice and square. And I'm going to hold it on there for 4 minutes. Now 4 minutes hasn't lapsed. I'm just going to say that 4 minutes has lapsed, because this is an installation video. And then I would do is just leave that in position, and I would move on to the next strain gauge, bond that down, and move on to the next one, bond that down. After it's bonded down, you're then going to connect the single strain gauge to the transmitter wire. So this is the transmitter. You connect it to the transmitter wire, and you just hand twist the wires together from the strain gauge to here. And you'll see on some of these cables, the shield wires there. It's just a bare shield wire. We don't use it. So you can just trim that off. And you'd power, your sensor would be powered up when you do this test. And this is ultra low voltage. This is like 3 millivolts or something passing through here. So you don't have to worry about just using anything it won't cause any shock or short anything out if the wires touch. But do your testing, you don't want them touching when you're doing the test itself. But as you're hand twisting these together, if they touch, there's no big deal. So just twist them together, like so. Black again here. Give that a very good twist. There we go. Now the white. And just make sure they're not touching, just like so. And then you're ready to do your tests. So once you're like that, and before you put the black stuff off, you just come back here after this is dried, and you peel this back toward the back of the sensor like that. It'll just come off, okay? So your sensor's bonded down, the wire's sitting there. This is all fine the way it is now. It's hooked up. Now I'm gonna put some strain on the axle, okay? You don't have to lift it off the ground, just put some strain on it. And you're gonna observe here, when you touch the PSI button, you're in the screen here, you're gonna see this number moving with and without strain up and down. That's gonna move thousands of points when you change that up and down. Right now it's steady because there's no strain on it, and I don't have the sensor powered up here, okay? So that's the test. Once you see that number moving up and down, awesome. You're gonna go to the next one, take this off, connect the transmitter wire to the next strain gauge, test that. And once you've tested them, you're gonna join this wire and then the other strain gauge wire that's glued down on the other side. Or if it's a single suspension, like a front axle, there's just the one strain gauge that's already connected to the transmitter. But on a lot of the axles, like trailers and walking beams and charmers, you're gonna connect 2 strain gauges together to the transmitter wire here after you've tested them. Once that's done, you're now ready to put the Loctite 5510 on. And what I do with this when I'm using it, I take this part right off because you use quite a bit of it. And I put some here, just like so. I do that first, and I just carefully, gently, because these little hair wires can break and these little soldering joints can break, and just come back gently like this. Make sure all that's just covered. I don't have to go hard. Just make sure it's all down in there. And then I carefully just move this to the side, and this will stick to the metal and prevent any rust from getting in there at all. So you do this first. Just make sure that's all nicely covered there. Then you put more. I do the back here first. Go under the cable. Go under the cable with it. You don't want water encroaching, and that's why I go like here. So the zip tie would come down, and that cable would run along there, like so. And then you put more on. You put a little heavier. And this is like a protective layer here. You can come a little thicker here now. So just go thicker over the strain gauge, and just lightly, okay? So that's just a protective layer. And this will run along, this will be zip tied down here. So just along your cable, like so, along here, cover the metal. It's exposed here. And you got a zip tie, you can zip tie right around, Loctite right around the zip tie is fine. And that's it. So that's installed. That'll dry overnight, 24 hours. And move on to the next one, seal her up. And you can submerge this underwater, completely caked in mud or ice or whatever. This is very durable once this is set like that. Before you get them on, they're very delicate, but once they're bonded down there and this stuff sets, she's very durable. Thank you for watching.